We are at the tail end of a few weeks that we've spent together, specifically talking about building bridges. And every year we spend a little time talking about our world, both locally as well as globally, and what it means for us to build, if you would, bridges both locally and abroad. And so we're going to spend a little bit more time doing that today. And I want to talk about a bridge builder, which probably most of us aren't very familiar with. Even if you have read and been through the Bible, the name Epaphras probably has escaped you. He's probably not in your category of folks that you know of. But Epaphras was a late first century Christian, someone who followed the teachings and the ways of Jesus. And he found himself, we're not sure whether he was born there or traveling through, but he found himself in a city called Colossus. And he began to share the good news about Jesus, the good news that God had this plan, which he kind of spoke to, but it was a little bit of a mystery. Everybody knew that God was going to send somebody to help folks out, but they thought they were going to help us out politically, like a lot of us were hoping one way or the other was going to happen. But instead, God said, you know what? Your greatest need is from the inside out, is spiritually. And so he himself came really as Jesus, and he did for us what we could not do for ourselves, paid a price that we could not pay so that we may be restored unto God. And so Epaphras shared this message with Colossus and the surrounding area. And they received it, and they grew in it, and they became established in it. And then they decided, you know what? This has been so life-transforming for us. It wasn't just a shift in philosophy. It wasn't just hey, we have a great community now that we can meet with. It was life-transforming. And so they decided that they were going to send Epaphras to go share with others. And somewhere along the line, Epaphras meets up with Paul. And the two of them begin to share with this. We actually find in the book of Colossians, it's called Colossians because it was written to the people of Colossus who lived there. And we find out in chapter 1 that Epaphras was indeed the bridge builder to those in the city to originally bring the gospel. We find out in chapter 4 that he is now with Paul. And Paul even gives a short little report. He says, I want you to know that Epaphras is working hard for you. And for the other churches in that region. So obviously, there were several, when I say churches, think of different gatherings of followers of Jesus. Now, all these different gatherings of followers of Jesus were supporting Epaphras as he was sharing with others what he had shared with them. And he was now with Paul. And in a lot of ways, this kind of reflects a little bit of why every year we talk about, if you would, bridge building. There are some amongst us that have a little bit more skill. If you think about it this way, I can build a basic bridge. If there's a little stream and I need to get over, I can go down and cut down a log, and I can even put some 2x4s together and span about 6 to 8 feet. But if you're going to drive across something, you don't want me building your bridge. Okay? And there's an aspect of bridge building that we can do, and we're going to talk about that. But there is an aspect of, if you would, building the Golden Gate Bridge that should really be left to those with some better skill, knowledge, experience, so on and so forth. And there are folks that God has raised up, and there are folks even among us that God is raising up to do that. But it's probably not going to be most of us. Like I say, though most of us could lay a bridge across the stream, most of us cannot nor ever will be able to do something like the Golden Gate Bridge or even a local city bridge. It spans a pretty good river. And so it's been from the tradition from the beginning of the church, which is followers of Jesus, that when they find someone that has this unique gift that really can do it, rather than saying, hey, we'll pray for you, good luck, they're so excited about the change in their lives that they say, man, we want to, as you have blessed us, as we've seen that you can bless others, as we see this gift and call and fruit of your life, we want to invest in that. We want to be part of that. Because ultimately, we receive the message because someone built a bridge to us, and so we want to invest in others receiving that as well. And so we support them. Now, some of you may know someone that's like that has that gift, that has that call. But many of us don't often get that exposure. And that's why we come together collectively. And we kind of do this as a collective. And so we have a team here called the Global Impact Team. The Global Impact Team. And it really is global. So if you're a global company, it doesn't just mean you work overseas. It means you work locally, right? You work in the United States and you work abroad. So when we say Global Impact Team, it really is that exhaustive. And it's their job to identify those who are gifted, to identify them and to qualify them, to make sure this isn't just something that they think they should do, but they actually are good at it or getting good at it, and there's some fruit in their lives. And then they're also the ones that kind of determine what's the best way that we can support them. So you and I may not have the time or the knowledge base to do that, but there's a few folks among us that have this heart and are developing those skills, and we call them the Global Impact Team. I think their names will come up here on the next slide. Ernie Morales is the leader of this. That's why he's been leading this time the last couple of weeks. John Sanders did lead it for many years. He's a part of that team, as well as Jim Panunzio, my bride Lynn King, Kevin and Janet Werner, and unfortunately I did this from memory this morning, but Bob Relia is also, I remember when I saw Bob this morning, I'm like, oh, that's right, we got another one. Bob Relia is also on this Global Impact Team. And so what you see in this, if you got this, if not, they're out here. You're well to grab it. It's free. This is a list of all the organizations we support in different ways. Some folks we support in that when they need space, we just let them use the space. A lot of folks we support in sending them a little money every month. Some folks we support in doing one-time projects. But all the folks that we support are in here. And it's this team, the Global Impact Team, that kind of looks, if you would, for those Epaphrases. They keep an eye out, and then we collectively come together and say, hey, tell us who it is, tell us what's going on. We hear about it, we're encouraged, and then we invest because we need to support gifted bridge builders. Long story short, we need to support gifted bridge builders. It is a biblical precedent. It is something that Christ has called us to do. It is, if you would, a proper response of thankfulness. If you've been around for any time, you know that one of the things that's impacted my life is seeing and being involved with some of the recovery programs. And one of the best reasons why the recovery program is so successful is because it is led by, not by professionals, but it's led by people who got in the program themselves, got a little clean and sober. They're not necessarily all the way there. And they want to just give back to what they received. And if you were here for when we did this series, The Power to Change, you'll find out the recovery program is based on the Bible. You should listen to that. If you're not familiar with the story of the 12 steps and how it was developed and how those folks, it started with a Bible study because they saw in scriptures that one of the key principles is that those who have been blessed by something invest in and bless others with it. And so with that kind of background, I want to take a little closer look at a letter that Paul writes to the church at Colossus called the Colossians. So if you have a Bible, the verses will come up on screen. If you don't, or you can borrow one in front of you, you turn to Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. Now again, Paul, as far as we know, had not been to the city or he didn't know much about it. It says in this letter that Epaphras himself told Paul about this church and told him about what was going on. And so Paul's kind of going off of what he hears from fellow Christians, from this other, if you would, missionary. Now, if you hear the word missionary, okay, let me just kind of clarify for you. Every Christian follower of Jesus, that is, true follower of Jesus, has the same mission. Whatever brand name they might have, Baptist, Methodist, Charismatic, Catholic, left, right, middle, whatever We all have the same mission. The mission is, first of all, personally, love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And secondly, to share that love that we received with others who need it. And that's the mission. We all have it. So a missionary is simply somebody who understands that mission and is doing that. Okay? It's just that simple. And so Paul hears from this other missionary, Epaphras, who's working with him about Colossae, and he writes them a letter. And in the letter, he begins in chapter 1 to say that Christ is all that and then some. I'm paraphrasing. You won't find that actually there. But he does say that before the beginning, Christ was. That all things are in him and all things were created through him. Not only is he better than sliced bread, he existed before there was even bread. Period. He's a pre-existent one. And it's all about him. And then he goes on to say, be careful of those who are coming to you, and they're really preaching this religion. He specifically says, be careful folks who come and say, hey, what's really important is that you celebrate certain holidays and that you eat certain foods. He says those things are religious. Just showing up in church, just going through certain beads, just crossing yourself, just going to a Bible study fellowship, just speaking in tongues, whatever it is, that's religious. Be careful of those things. Now, we know from other Paul's writings, he's not saying those things are bad necessarily. But he's saying those things really don't change who you are, which is what God cares about. So if you just think about those things as the measuring stick, you got it wrong. And then he says the measuring stick is this. It's internal. It's compassion, kindness, gentleness, humility. In fact, after he kind of gives his list, he says, run from the things that you used to be. Run from lust of the flesh, run from lying, run from cheating. But more importantly, run to a change of the heart. And then he says, you want to know what it looks like? And then he addresses different groups, and he kind of flips things. In this day and time, you always address the most important people first. So rather than doing husbands and wives, he flips it. He says wives, husbands, children, fathers, slaves, masters. He says, you want to know what this looks like? And basically he tells each of those groups, humble yourself, humble yourself, humble and serve, humble and serve, humble and serve. And that brings us to this part in the letter we call chapter 4, verse 2, so we can find our way around the letter. It's just a letter. It says, Paul says this. He says to the church there, devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful, and pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message, so we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Now, first of all, you need to know the context is Paul's writing this from prison. He, like many Christians today, is in prison for one reason. He told somebody else about Jesus. And because he delivered that message, and it wasn't the message of the people of the land, they actually imprisoned him for sharing that message. Now, they had other accusations, but what it really came to, and they always do, but what it really came down to, it's a freedom of religion thing, it really came down to he was sharing the gospel, so he ends up in prison. And so after encouraging them and telling them to be humble, as he kind of wraps this up, he says, listen, all of you now, I've told each group to be humble, all of you now, this is what I want you to do. And he says 4 things about prayer. The first thing he says, devote yourself, or commit yourself, or continually pray. And the interesting thing is when we talk to our missionaries, especially those like in the video that you saw that are out in the world, that are wrestling, that are being persecuted, the number one request we get actually isn't for financial support. The number one request we get is prayer. It's prayer. Because prayer, more than anything, is a posture. It's the posture of dependence. It's the posture that says, I can't, but you can. It's the posture that says, in the craziness that is our world, No matter who you thought should have or is or whatnot, president, in the craziness of our world, God, you're the only one we can trust. God, you're the only one who's going to work this out. There is no good choice but you. And I don't need to panic because of you. And we need to continually have that posture and understand that's why God did what he did, because we are dependent on him. And ultimately, whether you follower Jesus today, a week, you've been following him a month, a year, or 20 years, you're still in need. You still need him to do in and through you that which you cannot do yourself. You may be better than you used to be, I hope. But that doesn't mean you need him any less today than you did then. It should be a continual act of dependence. Secondly, our prayer must be watchful. This is like being awake and alert. If you think of a soldier, this is really a picture of a soldier on the line between their territory and the enemy's territory, and how naturally alert you are. And he's saying in your prayer, be alert. Look. There are so many places that we need to depend on God. Don't take your life for granted. Look for places, the things that you can take before the Lord. Third, he says, be thankful. And I think he put that one in there for me. I hope it blesses you too, but he put that in there for me because I have a habit in my prayer list to take my to-do list, my overwhelming to-do list. God, this is where my life is crashing down, right? My kids, all the people that need stuff from me at work, the country is doing this, my finances are doing this, help. And I can get overwhelmed if I don't stop and remember what God has already done. That, oh, wait a second, I had this kind of panic before. There was actually somebody worse that was elected, or we actually got through, a time where there's a worse time in the world, or if we forget to be thankful, if we forget what God has done, then we do begin to panic. We do begin to go, oh, God, it's all going crazy. And God's like, whoa. We've been through this before. Remember and be thankful. And the fourth thing, though, he says about prayer is to pray for us too. And it's about others. We pray purposefully. Now, here's the interesting thing about Paul. You would think, again, that he would say, pray to get me out of prison. And that's what I would have thought. But he doesn't. He says specifically pray for our message that there may be an open door. And what Paul understands, he just can't go around speaking everywhere, that some people are more open than others. He say, pray for an open door for us. Because like you, we are missionaries. We are on a mission to share this good news, to share hope in a world that needs hope. So pray for us, because we are dependent just like you are. That we may proclaim that mystery is that we thought that God was just going to come and set up a political utopia. And the mystery is that, in fact, he himself was going to come. Not send a human being, but he himself was going to come. And he was going to take care of the greater need, which is the spiritual death. Because if he had just set up utopia, I mean, if we had the best president in the world, guess what? Who cares? We'd still be stuck with the same old people. Seriously, you got the best president in the world, the best government in the world. We're still going to lie, thieve, steal, cheat. And that's the great mystery, is God understood the greater need. The greater need was that the heart needed to be taken care of. And then he'll send up the utopia that we are all waiting for to happen. And then he says, pray that I may proclaim it clearly. In other words, as many times as I've given it, as much fruit as I have, I too need to continue to learn to make it simple and clear. Pray for me. And that is the number one. If you're like, I would love to support our missionaries, but I don't have a whole lot of money. It's just not the season. I can't even put in. Great, because you know what they would rather have you do? Pray consistently for them. Pray intelligently for open doors, that they may do it. If you would just consistently pray, that would be the greatest gift of all to those that we support both locally as well as globally. We need to pray for our gifted bridge builders. We not only need to support our gifted bridge builders, but we need to pray for our gifted bridge builders. And if you need any motivation, I would invite you to join us this evening to see what our fellow brothers and sisters across the world are going for. And trust me, you will be motivated. Now, in Paul-like fashion, as much as he says, listen, I'm gifted, and Epaphras and I are called to do this, and we want your support, and we want your prayer, he doesn't leave it there. Verse 6, he says, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So it's true. Paul and Epaphras and a lot of the folks that we support, they are the gifted, if you would, Golden Gate Bridge builders. But that doesn't mean you and I don't build bridges. They may be simple bridges. They may be across really small streams or muddy areas, however you want to do your illustration. But we also are bridge builders. Every single one of us is a full-time missionary. Everybody. And you're rising, and you're going to sleep, and you're walking, and you're running, and your work. Every single one of us. Some of us is just more in our personal relationships than cross-culturally, if you would. And he says in terms of this a few things. First of all, he says, be wise in the way you act towards outsiders. In other words, just don't go in auto mode. Those outside of your faith, outside of your inner circle, outside of your Fab Five, they're important. And you have an important role to them. You have a role as a missionary. You have a role as an ambassador, a representative of Jesus. So be wise in that. Think about that. Think about that. I mean, if you, it's one thing for me to have a conversation with a person, but as soon as they know I'm a pastor, right? The conversation changes. If nothing else, it changes for me, even in my normal everyday life. The truth is that should be the truth for all of us, not just the guy who wears the title pastor. Because you identify with Christ, you and I need to be wise in the way we treat outsiders. Think about it, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect them from where they are to the same love that we've experienced, and be wise about it. Then he says, make the most of every opportunity. In other words, you're never off. Make the most of every opportunity. The opportunity when you're at the grocery store, the opportunity when you're driving, the opportunities at work, the opportunities at your school, the opportunities in your neighborhood, the opportunities in your family. Make the most of every opportunity. We'll talk a little bit more about that here. And then he says, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt. What he's saying is when you communicate to others, we can have conversations, and there are some people that they don't have much to say at all, and then there are some people that everything they say is the gospel truth according to them, and if you don't agree with them, then obviously you're an idiot, right? We're all experiencing that right now. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, we're all experiencing that right now. Right? And then there's those they're kind of in the middle. They don't mind engaging in a conversation, but they have a belief, they have a conviction, but they don't seem to go around blasting people with it. And they seem to listen to what other people have to say. And even go, oh, I could see how you could believe that. That's somebody they have graceful conversation. Seasoned with salt means, I don't know if you've ever had bland food, then you add salt, and then all of a sudden, oh, wow, it actually has flavor, right? This isn't a complicated. You don't have to go to seminary for this. That's exactly what it means. What it means is that there should be a light about your life. I mean, it means that in your conversation there should be something positively different about your conversation. That if you landed on the pro-Trump side, that I'm sorry, Trump. If you landed on that side, there should be something different rather than going nah, 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 or how can those idiots out there on the streets? Your conversation, there should be something wise, something taking the most of opportunity, including social media, that's understanding. That's I could see how folks felt like they worked hard to get certain rights that to them are life. Living in this country is life. If your parents happen to come over here against the law. Being able to marry the person that you love is life, even if it's someone of the same sex. Now, I'm not saying accept those things as truth, but show some grace. Show some love and compassion and understanding. You can disagree. Jesus disagreed with a lot. But for some reason, people still saw the grace in his life. If you're on the other side, you can be disappointed, but just be careful of the finger pointing, of the blanket statements that everybody's a bigot now and everybody's racist and I will not. That's not your conversation. You can have your conviction. You can believe the country made the wrong choice. That's fine, but it should be one trying to understand. Why? What was it that was so broken that they felt like? And how can your conversation be healing and mending rather than divisive, no matter where you're at? And why, he says here in the last thing, so that you may know how to answer everyone. See, there's an assumption there. Answer everyone means they asked a question. Paul's not assuming that you made them answer the question, that you started the conversation. What he's saying this, you lived a life where you treated each person with love and respect and grace. And you communicated with light, not darkness. And you even disagreed with them in love and understanding rather than hate and pride. And at some point they say to you, "What's up? I know that you're just as devastated about Hillary's losses as I am. Why aren't you throwing stones at these idiots? How can you say, hey, let's pray for him. Let's hope for that. How can you do that? Or man, I know that you were a huge supporter of Trump and this is your opportunity to tell people, nah, I was right. Those people on the streets are idiots. And yet, what are you doing? You're not saying that at all. You're listening to people. You're empathizing with people. You're saying, I can understand that. And they ask the question, and then you can say, you know what? The truth is, my hope wasn't in either person who won. The truth is I believe that God met me where I was at. And whether the country goes in a good direction or a bad direction, I'm in a good place because of him. So you know how to answer everyone. Building personal bridges. That's what we're called to do. We need to be bridge builders. We not only support bridge builders, we not only pray for bridge builders, but you and I need to be bridge builders. Now, in this last little part together, I want to highlight the importance of personal bridge building in kind of a unique way, I think. This week, I was killing some time. I don't know if you've ever done this, where you just kind of go through whatever. We have Netflix and I was going through the TED Talks. I don't know if you've ever heard of TED Talks, but there's very interesting, kind of short but poignant conversations. And I came across one by a researcher named Rachel Botsman. And the title of this was, "We Stopped Trusting Institutions and Started Trusting Strangers." This was the title of her talk, and so this got my attention. And so I listened to this, and she began to unpack this. First of all, she said, this whole idea of trust, and the way she illustrated it is she showed these couple boxes. There's the known and the unknown, and in between there's uncertainty. And the question that their research does is what pulls people from known into the unknown? What would give them reason to make that leap? And of course, in the illustration fashion, the answer to that is trust. Is that that's the bridge between the known and the unknown, is trust. And then she defined trust this way. She said, trust is a confident relationship to the unknown. Trust is a confident relationship to the unknown. And probably the best way that I think I could illustrate it for you so that I think you'll crystal get it, right, is when there's a good, not every father and mother this way, but when there's a good father and mother, and they're in the pool, and the kid's on the ledge or up on the diving board, and they're like, jump. Now the kid's on the known. The land is good, right? The water, not so much, especially at a distance. And so there's uncertainty. What's that going to be like? But they look down. Now, if it's anybody else, they're staying where they're at. But if it's mom or dad, sometimes, if it's mom or dad, there's a confident relationship in them. And so they're willing to make the leap to the unknown, not because they know what's going to happen. As a matter of fact, it's unknown and it's scary, but because they have a confident relationship with mom or dad. That shows trust. Now, in her studies, they have seen a shift in trust, in the way trust works. So she shared some other graphs. This first one, up in the upper left there, the local one, this is how trust used to work for most of time. Communities were really, really small. I mean, a large city was 10,000. I know that's hard to imagine. But most of history, and by the way, a lot of the world today still exists this way. And so trust was this way, is I would borrow money from Oscar. If I didn't pay Oscar back, because this was the totality of the community, everybody knew, A, that I borrowed money from Oscar, and B, that I didn't pay Oscar back. And so then if I would go to Craig, he'd go, Because the trust was local. We all knew each other. We all knew each other's stories. The confident relationships because we all related to one another. But as the Industrial Revolution went on and society shifted, trust began to change. Now, most of you know this, but let me just reiterate. In the beginning of the 1900s, not that long ago, a little over 100 years ago, we, for the first time ever in human history, crossed 1 billion people on the planet. 100 years later, we're now over 7 billion people on the planet. So obviously things have changed. Communities, even small communities, have gotten larger. And so for a season in the Industrial Revolution, that trust changed to institutional trust because we didn't know everyone. But in essence, there was supposed to be an institution like government or banks or churches. And because these people had authority and education and supposedly a certain amount of sophistication, we trusted them to do the transaction for us. We went to the institution dealt with whatever it had to get what we needed, and then we got it from the institution. Well, I don't have to tell you anything about history. From about the 60s on now, institutional trust is just about completely gone. Right? The bubbles have burst. Officials have been found out cheating and lying. Neither person, no matter who you voted for, right? Nobody trusts either one of them. And so institutional trust is broken. And so trust today, she said, when their studies, is this what she called distributed trust. Okay? Let me explain this. All right? There is a cardinal rule that every single one of you was raised with, including myself. We were told from our youngest age, the cardinal rule is never get into a vehicle with a stranger. Ever. Right? Hitching a ride used to be fine, but even in this upcoming generation, hitchhiking, almost never see it. You still see some, but almost never see it. You don't get in a car with a stranger. But if you do, old way, it's with a known institute because you assume that the institute hired people, did background checks, and made sure no crazy people are working for them. Old institution. But that institution that we call taxi drivers is dying. Instead, we have Uber. And Uber is made up of a network of hundreds of strangers who to a large degree have not been qualified. So why do we trust them? Because what's happened is this. We go online, whether it's a ride from a stranger, or it's a product from an organization that we don't know, or it's money that we want to send to help out with hurricane victims or earthquake victims. We go online to an organization and they say, so-and-so is the driver. And what do? We look at what are the strangers that I don't know who have ridden with this person say about them. How many stars do they have? What's their reliability? And if there have been plenty of comments, and they're mostly positive comments, all of a sudden that helps us bridge the gap. And we take a step out into the unknown, and we call a stranger whom I had just signed up yesterday to drive us somewhere. Or we buy a product. Now, what this means, I want you to think about this. Some of you, us, are frustrated because you've invited folks to church and they don't never seem to respond. And one of the reasons is this. Institutional trust is broken, including churches. The church is seen as an institution. Our TV evangelists have given plenty of people reason. The Catholic Church and abuse has given us plenty of reasons. The Bible Church, and it's funny, I mean, no one's innocent here. I'm picking on everyone. And so when you invite them to the institution, there's no benefit of the doubt. People do not trust the institution. And so the day of, we'll just let the pastor represent the good news, and I'll just invite them to the institution. Folks, that's about done. Folks, the way that folks are going to see the bridge from the known to the unknown, from where they're at, is as terrible as it may be for them at times, or as scary as it may be for them at times, to the unknown. What does it mean to give your life to an unseeable God who doesn't instantly make everything better? There needs to be a bridge of trust built, and the bridge has got to be personal. The other thing too, and I don't know what this means for us, but it also has to be multiple people. So let me give you an example. There was a day when you went to the office and there was the Christian from the Baptist church, and there was the Christian from the Methodist church, and there's a Christian from the Catholic church, and there's a Christian from the Charismatic church, and whatever. And they each individually kind of worked the crowd, if you would. The Methodist said, hey, you should come to my church. The Baptist said, you come to my church. On and on and on and on. Invite them to their individual institution. Folks don't trust that anymore. We're now living in a day where all five of those folks, they need to come together at their office. And they need to say, hey, Jesus is the most important thing, not the way we spell our brand. How do we begin to love on, season with salt, grace on our office, so that when somebody has an experience with the Methodist, and someone has an experience with the Baptist, and someone has an experience with the Catholic, and someone has an experience with the Charismatic, they're all, this distributed information is, these are trustworthy, grace-filled, loving people whose lives have been transformed. Maybe there's something to this. That's personal bridge building is moving in more and more and more importance, because that's where people are getting their trust. No longer from institutions, no longer from authority. There is no authority anymore. It used to be, we can say, well, the Bible says authoritatively do this. Now people want to go, fine, but what's your experience? What's your experience? Is that true? Because if I can't hear 10, 12, whatever people say, yes. If you want to gain life, you give your life away. I'm not going to do it just because a book says so. I'm not going to do it because the government says so, and I sure ain't going to do it because the pastor says so. But if I can hear how it's worked out in each individual life, and I hear it from multiple places, and it's personal, people that I know and trust, then that builds a bridge for me to trust. Every single one of you who are a follower of Jesus is a bridge builder. And you need to be wise about that role. And you need to look at every opportunity as an opportunity. Maybe just a layer. I'm not talking about bashing people over the head with the Bible. Matter of fact, that won't work because they don't see it as authoritative. If you're going to bash them over the head with something, bash them over the head with love, with grace. Now, I'm not saying compromise so you won't offend them. I'm saying you can disagree with them, but you can do it in a grace-filled way, in a listening way, in an accepting way, in a loving way. And you can remember that all politics are secondary to the one worldview that God did for us what we could not do for ourselves, and we need to be restored back to Him. And apart from that, everything else is meaningless. Now, again, I'm not saying you don't believe in some of those other things, and I'm not saying that you don't involve in some of those other things. Just remember to keep the main thing the main thing.